Greetings, everyone. Peter Maravellis here on behalf of City Lights Booksellers and Publishers and the City Lights Foundation. I'd like to welcome you to another installment of City Lights Live, the virtual extension of our events calendar, where we continue to celebrate the works of authors we know and love through readings, discussions, and forums into 2023. As is customary, before we begin, I'd like to take this moment to acknowledge that we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral grounds of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, aka the San Francisco Bay Area. We'd like to take this moment to offer our respect to those who have come before us as stewards of the land. Tonight, we are joined by Kavita Das in conversation with Wajahat Ali. They will be discussing writing in relation to social consciousness. We are celebrating the publication of Kavita Das's recently released book, Craft and Conscience, How to Write About Social Issues. It is published by Beacon Press, and it is the first major book for writers to more effectively engage with complex socio-political issues. And it is an excellent resource for activists and anyone interested in becoming more effective in generating social change. This evening's program is being co-sponsored by the Asian American Writers Workshop, which is a national literary nonprofit dedicated to publishing and incubating work by Asian and Asian diasporic writers, poets, and artists. Our event will be moderated by Lily Philpott of the Asian American Writers Workshop. Lily has played a vital role in the literary community for many years, having served as the Literary Programs and World Voices Festival producer at PEN America. She is currently programs manager at the Asian American Writers Workshop, and where she curates and produces public programs, oversees the Margins and Open City Fellowships, and the Create Now Writers in the Schools program. She's actually going to be leaving this position soon. We really are going to miss her a great deal, as we have so many great events together in the past, and we really hope to kind of cross paths with you again in the literary world. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone we're going to be posting links in the chat function of your Zoom dashboard with which you may purchase books tonight. We're also going to be hosting a Q&A towards the end of the evening, so please do post your questions, comments, and praise in that same chat function. I also would like to suggest that you switch to speaker view as to enhance your viewing experience. You can affect that setting by the prompt in the upper right-hand corner of your Zoom dashboard. That way you can kind of avoid that sort of Hollywood Squares effect. So please join us now in offering a warm welcome to Kavita Das and Wajahat Ali. To get the evening started, I would like to welcome Lily Philpott to open the discussion. Lily, take it away.
Thank you so much, Peter. I so appreciate getting to partner with City Lights and your extremely energetic and kind and generous introduction. So thank you so much for this partnership. Thank you, Wajahat and Kavita, for being here as well. Just one more time, this is what the books look like. Please memorize this, take a screenshot of the cover, go find these in your local indie bookstore or City Lights if you live nearby. I am speaking to you all today from Brooklyn, New York. I'm on ancestral and unceded Canarsie and Munsee Lenape land. I want to acknowledge that land and pay my respects to their ancestors, past, present, and emerging. Peter gave a really amazing introduction about the Asian American Writers Workshop, but I also want to just note that you can find out more about our work at aaww.org. You can read our literary magazine, learn about our fellowships, figure out what other programs we have coming up. And as Wajahat reminded me earlier, you can also donate to support our work. So thank you. I'm going to super quickly introduce Kavita and Wajahat, and then I'm going to turn the conversation over to them. Kavita Das has taught nonfiction writing at the New School and Catapult and has written about social issues for 10 years. Previously, she worked in the social change sector for 15 years, addressing issues ranging from community and housing inequities to public health disparities and racial injustice. Kavita is the author of the biography Poignant Song, The Life and Music of Lakshmi Shankar, as well as Craft and Conscience, How to Write About Social Issues, which she'll be discussing this evening. And Wajahat Ali is a columnist, public speaker, and attorney. His work has appeared in the Daily Beast, and he is the author of Go Back to Where You Came From and Other Helpful Recommendations on How to Become American, which was published in January 2022 by W.W. Norton, is available now in paperback. Please grab a copy. He believes in sharing stories that are by us for everyone, universal narratives told through a culturally specific lens to entertain, educate, and bridge global divides. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Kavita and Wajahat, and take it away.
Thank you, Lily, for that amazing introduction. I appreciate it. I will Venmo you your money for making me sound awesome. Kavita Das, congratulations on the publication of your new book, Craft and Conscience, How to Write About Social Issues. Kavita, show off the book. Show off the book. Look at that pretty book. Everyone just be shameless about showing off that book. And Kavita, also thank you for dressing up and making me look like a scrub. But that's okay. You and I are two South Asian children of immigrants who have defied tribal expectations and gone into this fun, explosive, terrifying, but always fulfilling field of writing. And you have written a book which is at the intersection of your two passions, I would say, what you've done for a living, which is not just nonfiction writing, but also social work, right? I would say you're a cultural worker in the literal sense, writing about issues of racial injustice and public health disparities and social equity. And in this book, it's a collection of not only your essays, but you've brought some young and up-and-coming writers by the name of James Baldwin and George Orwell and a few others in this 7-chapter book, Craft and Conscience, How to Write About Social Issues. And if you don't mind, I just want to start at the beginning. In the beginning of the book, there's a great poem you include by Pulitzer Prize winning poet now, Jericho Brown. And the poem goes by this, quote, "Every poem is a love poem. Every poem is a political poem. So say the masters. Every love poem is political. Every political poem must fall in love," end quote, by Jericho Brown. So the first question I have, and I might put you in an awkward spot, is it possible, or rather I should say, should a writer of color especially in the 21st century, or can a writer of color in the 21st century not be political with what's happening right now?
Well, I think there's different, levels of political. I think, the very first question that I ask my students of my writing about social issues class, which is that, this book was inspired by that class that I've been teaching for several years. And, I'd been teaching it in small batches and it, proved popular. And I was really inspired by the work of my students, who are a mix of like change agents and activists and academics and, folks who have experienced and witnessed the impact of social issues firsthand, and whose voices are very important for us to hear. And so that was the inspiration for writing this book, so that it could reach, these reflections and lessons could reach more people. But the first question I ask students, like on day one, before we even introduce ourselves to each other, is all writing political?
Yeah.
And we have this lively discussion usually, and people, have different opinions. And many people are like, no, it really depends on the intentions, of the writer. And I think the truth is, my own feeling and belief is that all writing is political, because and irrespective of the identity of the writer, but
also irrespective of the intention,
or irrespective of the intention. And what I was going to say, but writers of color, Black writers, the truth is, our writing is probably going to be even more politicized, irrespective of our intentions. So sometimes we go in with an intention, but some people, read your name, they see your picture, and they've already made some decisions before they've even read any words that you've said, so that's the honest truth, and so for me, I think that all writing is political. And I mean that in terms of like every genre. So it doesn't have to be a hard-hitting investigative piece or an overtly political piece. I mean, obviously some things are more explicit and some things are, less explicit, but Westerns, romance, I use the example in the book that, the Sex and the City series, which was on for so long on TV before it became movies. I mean, when you have 4 women in one of the most diverse cities in the world, and there are, very few substantive characters of color, that's a decision. So whether it's, by inclusion or by exclusion, that is a political statement that is being made by the show, whether it was intended or not. So that's what I think. And so, yeah, I do think that I don't think that we should fear it, but we should be aware that as writers of color, our words are going to be often taken in political ways, whether or not we intended them to be.
I think you touched upon something which is interesting, because you and I, we've engaged the politics, the religion, the culture with our writing, both fiction and nonfiction. But it's been really interesting to see many colleagues, peers, writers of color who have said, I'm not political. I'm going to stay out of it. This doesn't affect me. I just want to write about, a poem about my bike. And you touched upon something that, regardless of the intention, just looking at that writer's name enters them into a political discourse that, especially if they're a person of color or woman, marginalizes them. And I've seen a change, Kavita, where the awareness has been for those folks who are like, oh, post-Trump, post 9/11, it doesn't matter if I'm the moderate, the secular, the good one, the person who writes about frivolous issues. By my identity and by my name, I'm already marked. So I might as well wade into it.
Yes. Yes, I definitely, I've seen this happen in waves, and but the flip side of that is, I think that there are people who are writing on these issues without thinking through what their motivations are. I mean, I think what worries me sometimes is that newsrooms or writers themselves, they start thinking about things in terms of beats, because that's how the newsroom is configured. Yeah. And so suddenly it's like, oh, ever since, the murder of George Floyd and the rise in deaths of, Black men and boys and Black women and transgender individuals, sometimes at the hands of police, this has become a beat in a way. And, and the people who are covering it may or may not be really self-interrogating in order to write. On the flip side, there's been an overleaning that's been happening on, Black journalists, because suddenly it's like, oh, they want them to cover, everything. And they are, re-traumatized, but one of the points I make in the book, I kind of challenge the notion, and I worked at an organization, Race Forward, which had a news site that covered the news from a racial justice angle called Color Lines.
Yeah,
and,
great outlet.
And it was great, and I included a piece that I wrote for them, in this, and it really made me think about, they had an explicit mission. It's very clear, some people will call it a bias, but it was a mission. And so what I think is very interesting, this notion in the realm of journalism of neutrality and objectivity, and I really wanted to push back on that. And I was, I quote the likes of Christiane Amanpour and Masha Gessen, who both kind of suggest that truth, and justice are more important, and that's what I think than this notion of whose neutrality, whose objectivity. So if you have what we know is inequitable construct of media in terms of who owns media companies, who runs the newsrooms, whose neutrality is it that we are talking about?
I'm assuming they don't look like people like you and me, Kavita. Contrary to what people might assume in the post-George Floyd era, where there's been some hires, oftentimes you and me, a bit of the older heads, we can, I'm sure, share stories about when we were the darkest things in the room, and the tokens who were asked to be the cultural ambassadors of all our people, in addition to doing our job, right? And so that's why I ask, because, if every writer is indeed political, and especially if every writer of color is political, I know colleagues who are like, man, I'm exhausted. I don't want to be the fireman. I don't want to be the Wikipedia entry. I don't want to be the de facto CRT, diversity, DEI expert. I want to write a poem about my bike. Can I just write a poem about my bike? And so can we get to a point where, especially those who are marginalized, I want to say women and people of color, that they can excuse themselves from the burden or responsibility of attacking these political, social, and cultural issues that nonetheless affect them, just because they want some respite from it all and want to write a story about oh, I don't know, romance in the city.
Right. I mean, like I said, I mean, I think it's about explicitness and you know, implicitness. And so I think, you know, how do I say this? Do you know, and, you know, and I really do, you know, it's funny that I know I might be skipping way ahead, but towards the end of
we'll go back and forth. Don't worry.
We'll go back and forth. Yeah. Towards the end of your book, you know, and I think.
No, we're talking about your book.
People,
you.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, but I'm talking about your book, you know, towards the end of your book, and that hopefully relates to this, that I think many people who have worked in social justice, as well as people who've been covering social justice issues, particularly racial justice, as well as other, you know, really difficult, fraught issues. And there have been so many of them, and things are very high pitched in terms of how divided, you know, things are. There is fatigue, and there is, you know, and definitely with the election of Trump, you know, working in racial justice, and then having Obama be president. And, you know, during that time, you know, the organization was trying to make people aware that we were not post-racial, and we were beginning to talk about trying to shoot flares in the air about concerns about voting rights and all of that. And then to see it all kind of come through and then Trump be elected, it's very demoralizing. And, you know, but the one thing is, you know, to your point now, a lot of people know that there could not be any more denialism.
That's right.
I think, you know, as horrible as the kind of racism and hatred, you know, next to that was the kind of white liberal denialism, you know, that was happening, that, you know, when so many people were kind of screaming and trying to say. So this is to say, there's a lot of fatigue and burnout that happens, and, you know, mental health issues that, you know, where because of kind of being focused on this constantly and the trauma of it. And that's why I think it is important. I personally needed to, after Trump's election, and I was one of the people who was telling people, I think he can get elected, you know, and I was really like being treated like a conspiracy theorist. And today we actually have conspiracy theorists, and, you know,
we get paid a lot of money,
Yeah, I did not get that. But the issue is that, like, so I needed to kind of dial back, and I needed to not feel like I need to be that person. I need to be that person who lets people know, like, it's all resting on my shoulders, because in some ways, oh, it happened. So now we all have to figure this out, you know, together. And I think also the arrival of my child in 2019, you know, I decided, okay, I am very committed to justice, but I'm just as committed to joy. And I noticed that happening with other, you know, and the truth is, I looked at activists, true activists, and I don't consider myself an activist, who have been working, you know, on the front lines for decades. And I watched and learned and saw that they have this, you know, way to regenerate themselves by being committed to moments of joy and celebrating them. So I say this to go back to your point and say, if you want to write a story about your bicycle, your first red bike that your, you know, dad got you when you were, you know, little, absolutely do so. And, you know, if people politicize it, let them. Hello.
Sorry, baby attack.
Hello.
So this is baby Khadija. You know, I'm so glad you mentioned that. And you might have, you know, it's okay if we jump the gun, because it's important, because in this space, especially when any writer is writing about social justice or these issues, or if you're an activist, or if you're a public defender, they get burned out. And they ask themselves, why should I keep doing it? And your book, again, is called Craft and Conscience, because you talk about not just nonfiction, but also journalism and also the first person and narratives. We'll talk about that, but specifically the conscience part of it, right? With what you said about the burnout, about the burden, about the exhaustion, about being the brown Cassandras who warn all of our peers, and no one listens to us. And instead of getting rewarded for being right, we're still called crazy, and all the wrong people get like fail up. It's amazing, right? I think if I could go back in time, I would like to have been wrong about the war on terror, the 2008 economic crisis, Trumpism, and white supremacy. I'd probably be a millionaire. But F my life, I was right about it. I'm sorry. You know, it sucks to be us. But before you talk about the craft in your book, you know, your first chapter, I think it's important. the title is Why We Write. And you use the word interrogating our motivations for writing about social issues. So you start off with these two up-and-coming writers, Orwell and Baldwin. But before Orwell and Baldwin, I want to talk about Kavita Das. You know, with everything that you said, why do you still choose to engage with social issues through your pen, knowing that it's fraught with so many challenges and is an uphill battle, and especially as a woman of color, you get it the worst, especially online?
No, it's true. You know, I really believe in being reality based, you know, and acknowledging the situation, acknowledging the realities while holding hope for, you know, the future. And it's a very hard balancing act, because like I said, I don't believe in denialism, you know, right. And so but I think that I think that, like, for most writers, you know, you get to a place where you feel like I actually don't have a choice. I don't have a choice about the writing. It's in me, you know. I've caught the bug. And so
you didn't become a doctor. Shame.
I know. I have no other marketable skills. No, the short. No,
this is all I got.
I do have a secret MBA that I never talk about. But
I knew it. I knew it. I'm a retired attorney, so it's okay.
I know you actually wrote about it, so you spill the beans. No, I feel compelled. But what I've done in reorienting myself is to make it about what it is that I want to do, and not be so focused on the outcome. And, you know, like the chapter on, you know, writing op-eds, for example, right? I try to be very encouraging of my students. I don't want them to self-censor themselves. I don't want them, you know, there's a million obstacles out there, you know, in terms of getting your voice heard. And, you know, so many people, they say that their own motivations is, I start first to work out what I think of, you know, an issue. You know, first and foremost, I'm trying to process. Yeah. I'm trying to think about and work out on the page. And then it's about, okay, well, you know what? I actually think this is relevant. I'm not seeing this represented out there, or my friends are all talking about this, and yet this isn't represented, you know, this point of view. Often I see very like binary conversations about things, but not some of the gray areas, you know. But in the op-ed chapter, for example, I was very honest, particularly in today's climate. It is very hard to change someone's mind, because we are literally consuming different, you know, media. You know, people are consuming media, which then only you know, makes them more sure of their opinions. So they're looking for confirmation from their media, and it just kind of, it's getting exponential. So that isn't to dissuade, you know, folks who want to write opinion pieces or want to change people's minds through their writing. It's just to give them a taste of reality, so that they don't take it entirely upon themselves as, you know, the burden of having to change people's minds. And it is something that I used to feel, especially because I worked in social change, where my work was to kind of move the needle, and then came to writing from there. So I felt like I got to continue that work. You know, this piece has to do it, you know, which is
really the magic piece.
Yeah, this is the magic piece, you know, and, you know, and it wasn't from a place of ego. It was really this coming from that realm. And I, you know, I left that realm. So I have to make it worthwhile that I left doing that work to do this.
There has to be utility in this field for it to justify me stepping away from the trinity of occupations.
Yes. I mean, and we already, you know, as we've talked about, I didn't even do the you know, the really useful occupation of medicine that my whole family is engaged in. So
MBA is useful, but no, but it's that burden we put on ourselves, not just as writers about, you know, what's the purpose of this, or if I write an op-ed, there has to be an outcome and I have to change policy, but the expectation from our communities as well is, well, what have you done lately? What's the purpose of your writing? Who have you changed? It's an interesting ask. It's an interesting utilitarian ask of creators and writers that I've seen as not asked of other folks. Like no one ever goes to like a businessman and says, how has your sales chart impacted society? Like, how, you know, you working in that like Bechtel, how has that impacted society? Probably for the negative, right? But I think for us, for those who choose to marry our consciousness with or in conscience with the craft of writing, there is a type of expectations, especially from what they call ethnic communities, that our work has to have utilitarian value. And so how do you manage that, Kavita? Because I know you're talking about it right now because you found a way to find joy and purpose in the process itself, that not every single op-ed has to change. But how does a writer then, you know, fuel themselves, even if they have the motivation to be like, why am I pushing this rock up the hill? Like, what's that reminder for them that no, this matters?
Well, I can just tell you that, you know, for me, I started, you know, I felt so late to the game. I started on the cusp of 40, you know, trying to write the book that, you know, I left to write the book, you know, not this book, the first book, which was a biography. And I had all kinds of imposter syndrome about that. And that's a whole thing, is there's an imposter syndrome. So I didn't have the MFA in creative writing because
I don't either.
I feel like I had the time for that. You know, I was already starting at 40 and I knew the project I wanted to do. And then the subject of my biography died a year into me working on it. And I had, you know, interviewed her a handful of times. And so, and I had promised her and I had promised myself, and I didn't know, you know, and I had to put one foot in front of the other and figure that out. And there were, you know, all the challenges with that. But, and while I was doing that, you know, the world was happening and I had just come from the racial justice sphere and I was looking at the publishing realm and realizing how inequitable it was. And this is
still is.
Yeah, it still is. But this is 10 years ago. We weren't even really talking about, we were talking about it in dark bars and corners, but there were not like, you know, and so, you know, writing pieces which I felt like I felt compelled. I could not come from having worked in what I did and coming to this space and then, you know, put my eyes down and pretend I didn't see it. And it was this feeling of, are you all seeing this? Are we not going to talk about this? You know, these overwhelming statistics of, and that's the other thing. It isn't even measured. You know, it's as if it's a cottage industry, you know, and they measure everything. They know how many books they sold and, you know, and everything. They have media stats, but they weren't measuring this because why would you measure something that you don't want anybody to know about? So it's just kind of, you know, I felt compelled, but I, after several years of kind of really gunning it, you know, and, you know, following the headlines and then trying to, almost either chase things or be ahead of the curve or, you know, relate something that I felt strongly about to today's headlines, you know, because pitching to, you know, to the news cycle, you know, burnt me out in a way. And when Trump burned out most of us. Yeah. And when Trump got elected, it really was like, you know, great. I got published in the Atlantic. I got published in, you know, all these wonderful places. And I was very proud of some of the things I've written, but there was a big, so what? It didn't, you know, I didn't fix things, you know, just like this amazing feeling. And then I thought, okay, well, you know what? I started writing quieter pieces, not all the time, sometimes, you know, but like, you know, how Wordle can be kind of seen, you know, relating that to equity. You know, and so quieter pieces that are less about shouting at people and kind of trying to be heard over the binary debates and screaming debates that, you know, we see. I stopped watching TV news. That also like helped too. During the pandemic, I didn't have a TV. We moved into a place and, you know, I had no TV and I had been the director of marketing communications for a racial justice organization. So I was like watching multiple news, you know, on different devices and then, you know, being on social media. And so I went through this, you know, and I realized but I didn't stop engaging. I want to make that distinction. I was very much informed. I was turning to different sources, but I wasn't feeling the need to consume, you know, the headlines that, you know, they wanted me to consume. and, do it on the 24/7 cycle that they wanted me, and then feeling the need to then be part of that, So pulling back from that really helped me, to kind of push back on the burden, and it's almost like an addiction, because you start to really, believe the hype. I have to publish that piece. I have to do this. I have to do that. And I think it is, to your point, it was a triple factor of the immigrant child, utility factor. I didn't become a doctor, so at least I should be useful here. And then having left my post and coming to writing, feeling that too. And then in writing, yeah, you are judged even in the writing, finding an agent, finding,
Brutal.
And it's just, you think, oh, this byline will lead to this byline, will lead to this byline, and you're just trying to, so there's a way in which you leave one ladder and you think, oh, I've left the corporate sector, I've left the law, the legal profession and all the, that entails, and then you just erect another ladder, in this different space that you think is, different from that, but you just erect another one there.
There's examples that you give in your first chapter of writers, and it comes full circle, right? If everything becomes political, because the politics of Wordle, the racism behind housing, we're learning about right now. Why is climate change affecting some people differently? We saw it with COVID. So even something that people think doesn't intersect with race and social justice, it does, right? And then you see writers who have used fiction. And you talked about how sometimes you can have a softer landing, right? Or the personal essay, right? And you saw Orwell do this with fiction. You saw Baldwin do this with both fiction and nonfiction. And yet we see, fast forward decades after they have passed away, that they're crushing it on the bestsellers list in the past 2 years, right? And I think that's important, especially from the get-go in your book, for young writers or writers who feel burnt out or writers who feel like, oh, what does it matter? You give them Orwell and Baldwin. So what was that choice to start with Orwell and Baldwin?
Orwell, I came late to Orwell. I mean, I read Animal Farm, in school.
Who didn't in eighth grade?
But then I stepped away. And it was during my time trying to figure things out as a writer and find my voice as a writer, and this burden I was putting on myself, right, to holding myself to in writing about social issues. And I picked up this book by Orwell and this essay called Why I Write. And what I love, and I really, this is like the first thing we talk about in my class, is we go over Orwell's 4 reasons for why he writes. And you think, okay, this is Orwell, this is the author of 1984, this is the author of Animal Farm, and so many other amazing works of social conscience. And you think, okay, he's going to say to change society, to change, to change the world, to push back against fascists. But he starts, his first 2 reasons are about the beauty of the language. His first reason is actually about to get back at, petty ass, who's, and he literally says, I'm talking about the mean parents. I'm talking about those bullies and
God bless petty.
And he says, it's to get back at, people. And I thought, oh my God, he's so honest that he reveals. And then he talks about the beauty of the language. And then he talks about his own ego and how it feels to have your words, out there in the world. And finally, he comes to, oh yeah, and it's really important to, use your work to try to, change the world. And I felt so, I felt unburdened. And I felt like, oh, it's okay to want to write beautiful sentences. It's okay to want to write about your beautiful red bike. And the thing is, the good and the bad is that when you write something and you put it out into the world, you cannot control how it is perceived and how it's received, and so it becomes about the reader's intentions and the reader's perceptions. And so you have to kind of let go of that at some point and say, okay, I know what my intentions were. Or you have to remedy if you have crossed lines, if you have done something, it's a moment of growth in, where you say, oh, I had not intended to hurt feelings or to be offensive. I'm glad that this has been, I've been made aware of this, and I want to do better. And that's why there's a whole chapter in this book about, cultural insensitivity and, understanding it and avoiding cultural appropriation, since this is a perpetually fraught topic that comes up, in the literary realm and in the creative realm.
Oh, I was going to ask about that, but before I do, who did you want to get back at, Kavita? This is no one's watching. Just tell me.
We don't have enough time. No.
You have like a Kill Bill list? I have a Kill Bill list.
I really should create one. No, I really think that I really think that in quieter, ways, like when I've written the quieter things, the funny part is I feel, or I will say the opposite. So I was writing things that were removed. I was writing a biography, and I was, writing pieces about social issues. And even when they would get, fraught, I wrote a piece for The Atlantic, and then I made the mistake of reading comments about it.
Why, Kavita? Why? You never do that.
I know, it was a rookie mistake, and I really should have known, but I was feeling so, high on life, that I had gotten this piece published that was, just a figment. And then I read it, and it was like, oh, here's another writer of color whining, and and I was like, oh, so I turned it into a McSweeney's piece. I turned that into a whole thing about telling editors when in the year they should reject pieces. So there's a way, and this is actually relates really to something I wanted to ask you about, is using humor when writing about social issues. I think it's something that is, humor can be so disarming. I love what you say in your book. You said humor, both sublime and silly, sophomoric and sophisticated, unleashed with purpose, can often help communicate very real, hard truths about American society. And you go on to say, humor helps me process and find moments of much needed catharsis or release. And, I agree. I think humor can be a really effective way in talking about fraught issues in a way that's disarming people's defenses. But I also think it's really tricky and hard to do well, as you do, because there's the risk, of it being seen by allies and even opponents of making light of the issue, and can you talk a bit about how, in this book, even the framework, even the title is laced with humor, and yet it is very much, on point, so I really appreciated that. So can you talk about how you've injected humor when writing about socialism, how you walk that?
It's first, James and Nick give you thumbs up for dropping the TV, so you have two fans who appreciate you cutting the cord. But with humor, it's one of those situations where it's all subjective, and despite your intentions, you could have the best of intentions, but you don't know how it's going to land. So you have to be very deliberate and intentional with how you use humor and be purposeful, right? And so I've tried to do that because I've seen throughout my life that humor, when used, I think with that intention to go against the oppressors, or especially against fascism, it disrobes them. It weakens them. It makes them look like buffoons, right? It's like what Mel Brooks does, and Mark Twain does, and others. And of course, I'm not comparing myself to them, but throughout history, you've seen some really blunt truth tellers effectively use humor to both sugarcoat the medicine, and, as you've said, otherwise soften the same narrative through a different lens. And what science has shown is that when people are laughing, they release endorphins. And what also happens when they're laughing and being entertained is their defenses go down, and they become more open to otherwise political, cultural, social ideas that they were hostile to. So it's like, oh, they become more amenable to it. So if you can land that kind of perfect blend between subtle or kind of hard humor, but with some truth, what I've seen, it's an effective mechanism for me to kind of reach the same destination or goal that you're trying to do. At the same time, I've always said people make the fatal mistake of trying to be funny when they're not funny. You don't have to be funny. You just have to be interesting. And I think as a writer or a performer or a cultural creator, at the end of the day, you have to be interesting. You're engaging with an audience. And in your book, you talk about the relationship, right? It's one of the chapters, the relationship between the writer and the reader, the responsibilities that both of them have. And you mentioned something that it doesn't matter what your intention is. Sometimes you can have the best of intentions and it just lands the wrong way. And sometimes you stick with it and say, you know what, I'll take this one. I'll take it on the chin. And other times you're like, I've ended up harming that very same community that I was trying to uplift. So maybe I have to do some repair. And my flip question to you then, in going off one of the chapters that you wrote about that relationship that exists between writer and reader, what is that give and take, Kavita, where you're like, I have to say what I have to say. And I know it's gonna piss off some of my allies, but this is my truth. And even if it does, and even if they if they're grossly misreading my intention, is this in this freaking social media world where no good intention is rewarded, right? Like nobody cares at all. This is a moment of standing firm. And this is a moment where I will apologize. Like, how do you balance that? Because that is a tricky terrain. And the reason why it's so tricky is people fear, for lack of a better word, that type of cancellation or criticism that they censor themselves.
Yeah. No, it's a very, I mean, this is something that I've written about. Like so I'll start with, I think it's two things. Again, I think it's two things. One is there's the issue of, I'm thinking how to, how about this, there's, the reader and subject, there's, when we are writing, when we are trying to reveal difficult truths, there is a reason why those truths have not been said. And it's because there's a taboo. There's a lot invested by people, our communities, our families, in our societies, in keeping those things obscured. It upsets the apple cart, the power dynamics, their stigma against, and so when we are telling those truths, yes, sometimes we think we're going to be, welcomed into the promised land. Oh, thank you, and in fact, we're told, why did you air this dirty laundry? Who told you to say that? You have it completely wrong. And so, that's an important point to know. But the other side of it is, going back to the point that we were talking about, is the delivery. And there's a way you deliver that truth. And so if there's a way to do it in a kind way, because it all depends who you're writing for, what your objective is. And that's why there's I start the book by asking folks to interrogate their motivations. And then I build on that to ask, okay, what do you hope to achieve? And what do you fear, could be the ramifications? And I just think that it's good to map all of this out, to have a sense of things before you, go forth into the world, so that you have a sense of why you're doing what you're doing, what you expect, what you're worried about, and you have a game plan, so what if what you're worried about happens, so I think it's really, I think it's really important to, think about the delivery. So it's like you can tell the hard truths, but you don't necessarily have to say it in a hard way. You can use humor, you can use kindness, you can use reason, and really start from a place of not alienating the other side, and sometimes, I mean, I'm somebody who definitely has evolved on this front. I sometimes used to come out kind of blazing, you're wrong, and I'm going to show you all the different ways you're wrong. And, here's point 1, point 2, point 3. And then I thought about, who is this essay for? Do I really think that, the person who has opposing views is going to, read this and, appreciate it when I'm calling them out in the first line? So, perhaps it's like, what if I write this, in a way that is either really focusing on the intellectual argument and kind of staying there, or trying to tell a story. And so that's, one of the points I make about, once you figure out the relationship that you have as a writer with the subject and the reader, and you think, okay, is this a piece, depending on the outlet, where I'm going to give them all the facts, all the research, or if that's not on it, this is a place where you're thinking, you know what, this is a really mainstream, it's a digital publication. I only have a few paragraphs to, to really.
900 words.
Yeah, exactly. We all we pitch our pieces and we're like so excited, and you're just thinking about all you're going to do, and then the editor writes and says, and you're like, what's the word limit? And they're like 500 words, and you're like, oh my God, that's like 1/10.
My name is like 87 words. So.
Yes. So I mean, so I just kind of we have to kind of think in those practical terms too,
You I think inadvertently answered Jess's question. I don't know if you read Jess's question, but that's her question was, what are some ways you'd suggest self-interrogating one's own work as we go? This is why they pay me the big money, Jess, because I kind of just exquisitely and organically fit it in there. With the 10 minutes we have left, I will open it up for Q&A for the participants, but I do want to ask this question, Kavita, based off of what you were just saying. In this day and age, as we are fighting what I believe is the rise of right-wing authoritarianism, both here and abroad, when we're fighting against conspiracy theories, when we're fighting against stochastic terrorism and disinformation, where is the balance between trying to reach out through our work and convince those people, and then trying to resist and realizing no matter what we do, we're not going to win over those folks, but maybe we can win over the majority?
Yeah, I think that, this is exactly what you're talking about, is what I had to calibrate for myself over the last few years. And I realized that I was reclaiming, my writing purpose, which was, I want to write for me. I want to write as kind of a witness and a chronicler, not, and if in writing as a witness and a chronicler, I can change some minds, that's great. But I am very aware of how entrenched, things are, and, I worked in public health, and, I've watched this whole, epidemic unfold, and I've been just absolutely aghast by the disinformation and misinformation and, mishandling, all of that. So I really think that, I think that it's finding that kind of balance and being kind of realistic and saying, and I also think that, I think I say this in the book, the way I articulate it is, if you see yourself less, there is your singular voice, which is very important, and your perspective, which is very important, but it also, think of it as one in a chorus, and when I'm very inspired by social justice leaders, from the past and the present, who have been playing the long game,
right,
on issues, and realizing that, it takes a long time. Our problem is that in our culture, we love iconoclasts, we love singular people, and we also love speed. So those two things are really problematic, especially when and they're antithetical to social justice movements. And
take a long time.
They take a long time, but the issue is the way things are portrayed in the media is usually they'll focus on the cusp, the moment that it happened, and so social change.
Rosa Parks didn't move. Then there was MLK, and now we have Obama.
Yes, and it happened just like that. And
it's a post-racial society.
Yeah, and so that's a very attractive narrative, right? And if you think about, the way our history has been taught to us in this country, it follows a lot of similar, similar things. So it's really kind of trying to step back and say, realize that, realistically, and again, this is not to dissuade. This is not to say, people's voices, it doesn't matter. It's to just be realistic and feel like, actually, you are part of something. You are, joining many waves in the ocean, or the many waves in the sea of change, and not feeling the burden to have to be, the lone voice that, makes change happen.
Asian American Writers Workshop, probably also known as Lily, has asked a question, but it's interesting. Before I ask that question, you and I didn't talk about this, but I felt the same way with my role, with where I am in life, is if I can just be a chronicler or a witness, and if my children in particular, my 3 kids, you saw one, as you can clearly see, not sleeping, can look back and say, oh, at least Baba was on the right side. He did something, oh, here, look at that chapter. Oh, he got it. And maybe someone could be inspired down the inshallah in my lifetime, but if not in my lifetime, words live on. And if I can get the last word and at least be on the right side of history and then inspire someone along the way, you never know. You never know what book or what poem or what article can just inspire that young writer and help them then carry the torch, which is necessary for all of us to, move this boulder forward. Asian American Writers Workshop asked, can you both talk a little bit about, let's talk about the craft, because you talk about craft and conscience, right? Writing and working in different mediums, from biography to nonfiction to playwriting, how does each genre serve different functions, and does it help answer different questions? And you talk about op-ed in your book, you talk about the personal essay, you talk about investigative reporting. Talk to us about the different genres.
I'll be very honest. I went into writing my biography about an overlooked Grammy-nominated, singer who is the, most prominent Indian female in the movement that brought Indian music to the West. And I, came to that right out of working in racial justice. And I don't think that's by accident. I was sitting and working, and we were talking about the macro ways of racial injustice. And then I think it occurred to me that how does racial injustice work on a micro level? By the erasure of lives and contributions. And I thought somebody should go and do this, not me, because I don't know, I'm not a Hindustani music expert. I'm not a biographer. I was having a hard enough time wearing all the hats I was wearing, as the marketing communications director for a racial justice organization during Obama's second term. And slowly, there were people close to me who were waiting for it to dawn on me that that person was going to have to be me. I very much was trying to chronicle her life, but also trying to ask the question of how did she get written out? So that is is that a literary question? Is that a social justice question? Yes, it's all of the above. And I think, I've watched Domestic Crusaders, and, and I could see, certain questions being asked, in that play, of the people who were watching, while they were, even as we were laughing, even as we were kind of finding the characters endearing, and all of that. And that's something that, plays and movies and, all of that is very immersive. And it's part of that, I think, disarming, aspect where people, are reading a life story, people are watching a play, people are watching a television program, that they're not watching a documentary necessarily. So they think that, they're being, and their goal is entertainment, often. And I think that it's very, it's tricky, but I think, when you can present a social issue in a really interesting light and think of it in terms of its narrative elements, who are the players, what's the crux of this, and link the plot to the social justice issue, I think it can be really interesting. But it's hard to do. I mean, I've seen people react badly when they feel like they're being preached at, like when they went in to watch a play or a movie and they want to be entertained, and they feel like, that they feel betrayed, So I don't know what your thoughts are.
For me, I've always had, just to answer that question quickly, it's just me, I get bored and I like to have fun, and I don't like to limit myself. So if I can write a play, it allows me to use fiction and storytelling and theater to have an immediate response with a live audience. And through these different characters, I can tease out different political, social, cultural questions, but at the forefront be like, okay, they've come to be entertained. You can entertain them, and through the Trojan horse of entertainment, you can also tease out some questions. Through op-eds, it's like a jab. There's something, it's like what I call a jab. You have your haymakers, you have your uppercuts, but like a jab just keeps you fresh as a boxer, right? And Ishmael Reed said, writing is fighting. So it gives me my weekly jab. I keep fresh.
I show you my boxing.
Yeah, it's like 800 words, fresh. I make an argument, stay topical, and then I could also strategically use that to get on TV sometimes and then expand on it, right? Investigative reporting, I've done that before. A different beast where you can like do the work and the anecdotes and the data, and then get that narrative and story to a think tank that could change policy. As a lawyer, it was all about storytelling, both on the page and in front of the audience, right? So for me, it's all about how you can use storytelling when mixed with a specific intention to deliver a certain result that engages the audience, but I think for you and me, we are also intrigued with entertainment, but also poking at, revealing, dissecting, interrogating cultural and political and social issues of the day, right? Then maybe this work of entertainment that might superficially look like fluff has the power, ironically, to actually do more to change people's opinions than, say, you know, a political discourse or an Excel sheet or something which is like a political speech or like a sermon. And that's how it works, because I think people are so oversaturated, like you said, so overwhelmed, so exhausted, that when you kind of give them a little bit of an askew angle through science fiction, horror, comedy, it can hit really hard. Like Get Out, for example, right? Just giving you one example. Final question I have is this for you. We're at the 10, and thank you all. And the book again is Craft. The book again, Kavita, show everyone, is right in front of you. It's available at City Lights. It's Craft and Conscience, How to Write About Social Issues. You have to buy it, and you have to give money to AAWW, which is a nonprofit. Tax season coming up. It's a 401c3 nonprofit, so you'll get a tax rebate. But before I introduce Peter back from City Lights, last question. For those who are watching right now, thank you for staying with us, who want to write about these issues and who are afraid. The waswasa, the whisper that comes is, who am I? I'm nobody. Why does my voice matter? I'm not an expert. If I write, I don't want to expose myself to criticism from inside my community, outside my community. I have a story to tell. It's a good story, but I don't want to put myself out there. You're also a teacher and a mentor. What advice do you have to those writers who have a story to tell, but feel like their voice will not be appreciated, or who are overcome from the whispers that censor themselves?
These are really good points, and those are issues that come up in for my students in my class. But the main point is 2 points. One is just start. And one thing that was told to me at one point that was really helpful to me and continues to be helpful to me, that I've passed along, which is the writing and publishing are two different things. And so if you are using concerns about the publishing, of it being out in the world to not even get it on the page, that's really unhelpful to you. And so starting with just focusing on how can you get this story that you feel is really important on the page, and then think about, and then work on the craft of it and focus on the craft of it. And then you can start thinking about, once you have it on the page, because I see people get completely overwhelmed by these questions, which are relevant questions. And I think they are important questions. And, there are some, potential solutions, and we've talked about some of them. So perhaps if you are so concerned about repercussions from your community or your family, you can fictionalize, you can write under a pseudonym, there are possibilities. And sometimes I mention them just so that people know that there are solutions. You wait till people die, I don't know, there's lots of...
I mean, I'm serious. That's, people but I tell people, you just have to start writing. And if that's the hurdle, write under a pseudonym, right? It's online, no one can see your face. Start that way. And then once that you build up your credibility, and once you feel like you feel confident, then you can reveal yourself if you choose.
I think it's really, really important. I mean, I've had people in my class where my class is the first writing class that they've taken. And I want to tell you that some of those folks are the best writers, or they have such clear voice. They're really good storytellers. Well, I won't say that they're the best writers, but they are amazing storytellers, and their stories are very vital for us to hear. And I try not to get in the way. When I come across that, I don't want to, kind of really cramp their style, because they have tapped into something that is really vital within themselves. And so, I think that's really, really important. I think starting and really decoupling the writing process from the publishing process will really take you at least part of the way.
Thank you so much, Kavita, for your time. Thank you for all the participants and for all the people watching online. Thank you to City Lights for hosting this. Buy the book from City Lights And thank you to Asian American Writers Workshop for also sponsoring this event. And thank you to Kavita for inviting me to talk to her, even though I didn't wear a jacket and she wore really pretty bling. Peter, take it away.
Thank you, Wajahat.
Righteous.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Lily. Thank you, City Lights, AAWW. I really appreciate this tonight's program and this conversation.
Well, it was a pleasure having you both grace our virtual halls. Kavita Das, Wajahat Ali, thanks ever so much. This was really such a thoughtful and very, very deep conversation. I was having a light bulb moments throughout. So I'm very, very grateful. And really, it was fabulous to co-host with our partners at Asian American Writers Workshop. Much gratitude to Lily Philpott. I'd like to encourage you all, please learn more about the good work of AAWW. Check out the links we've posted. I've also posted links with which you may purchase books. And this is, of course, the beginning of the winter season. We have some wonderful events scheduled in the months to come. The authors joining us include Adrienne Marie Brown, Ann Waldman, Aiz Yama Everett, the filmmaker John Sayles, Lakeisha Carr, and much, much more. In March, we're hosting a day-long symposium called Humanizing Education, Equity, Belonging, and Justice for Immigrant and Refugee Students. We'll also be hosting a conference in the fall about the effects of advanced technologies on the environment and culture. So please check out the links we posted in the chat and keep an eye on our website. Subscribe to our newsletter, and then you get, kind of bi-monthly updates on also all the books that we publish. We're also publishing us as well as a bookstore. And we continue to publish poetry, literature, and translation, and of course, nonfiction with a progressive political outlook. Of course, the store is open always. Please come on down Monday through Thursday, 11 to 8, Friday through Sunday, 11 to 9. We're slowly getting back to our pre-pandemic hours. Really, it's been such a pleasure seeing all of you tonight in the chat. Tonight's event has been made possible by support from the City Lights Foundation, continuing the legacy of our founder, the late Lawrence Ferlinghetti, through public events like this one, our publishing program, and educational outreach, all dedicated to sustaining a vibrant community of readers, writers, and independent thinkers. So take care, everyone. Best for the new year to you. We hope to see you all again soon.